watch this and direct them over to the event page.
Sounds good, because we are live, and we're here for the third annual virtual bloggers conference live on Google Plus and Periscope. So up Periscope, folks, because if you're over there, come on over here. And we're going to be talking about podcasting. And podcasting is something that I keep being told I need to start doing, and I think it might be the time that I start listening to folks tell me about that. So let me just say hi to our panel right now. We're missing one. I'm not sure if he's going to show up, but hopefully he'll jump in. So Keita Roberts, and she is coming to us from Maryland, right?
I'm in Maryland right now, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say to Delaware, but I forgot you moved, so you're in Maryland. So that's close enough, the East Coast. And great to have you here, and I was a guest on your podcast just recently, you and Peabody, so it's nice to have you here to talk about podcasting with us.
Thank you.
And Peabody Johanson, and you are here from Canada, eh?
No, actually, I'm originally, but I live in Seattle.
That's right.
Or the Seattle area. Sunny Seattle, I might add, right now.
Well, I'm surprised you're inside then. Usually everybody goes outside when the sun comes out, don't they?
We've had so much sun lately that it's almost the opposite. We're actually kind of rain worshiping right now on the West Coast.
Wow, bummer.
Yes.
Well, hopefully you'll get back to your rainy days and see.
We need it. The crops need it, actually. So.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming today, and we will get started. And then let me say hi to my friend Shannon, the Shan Man, Hernandez.
Hi, Chef. How you doing today? Hi, everyone. Keita and Peabody. This is the first time I've met you guys. So how are you guys all doing?
We're doing great.
We're doing pretty good. It's a Sunday.
I know who's hosting here, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm all good about just sitting back and listening. The more you guys talk, the less I talk, the better it is for everyone. And everyone who's watching us live, if you have questions, leave them in the comments section, and we will do our best to answer them. And we're just going to get started. We're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to be a podcaster and how you started. So you guys, Keita and Peabody, you're the new kids on the block with podcasting compared to Shannon. So I'm going to let you start and talk about why you decided to podcast and what motivated you and what you've been doing podcasting.
I decided to make Season with Sass because, I listen to a ton of podcasts myself, and I realize it's an extremely underserved market. Podcasting is on the rise. It's so much fun, and I know that I listen to them all of the time. I prefer that over radio. At the gym, when I'm driving, it just makes me, I have happy podcasts, I have serious podcasts, I have, social news and all that. And I really wanted to talk about food blogging for food bloggers since, Shannon, I don't know if you are, but 3 of us in this room are food bloggers. And I just wanted to have open, real conversations about what it takes to food blog and be successful and share that with a wider audience in a way that I hadn't seen done yet. There's a few others that are doing it now, and I think that's awesome. But I really just wanted to bring that to the forefront. And Peabody and I were hanging out last October, and I was like, hey, do you want to be my across-country co-pilot on this? It'll make scheduling easy. And so we kind of just started there.
Oh, you're muted, Chef.
And so you're using Google Plus to record your Hangouts on.
We do. I had previously done a podcast in the comic book industry, and we use Skype for our interviews and Skype MP3 recorder. But we found that since Google Hangout everybody has a Gmail account, we found it easier to send out a link via Google for a private Hangout, since YouTube's going to record it anyway and upload it to my channel. It's a great way to just record the podcast, and I like the visual when you're talking to somebody. I think it really helps, especially when you're in an interview format. You can kind of see when somebody's taking a natural pause or their dog is going crazy and they need to take a break, and it just I think it makes for a great way to talk. And I think also when you're face-to-face, it's a little more casual and a little more real. So we record via Google Hangouts. It's saved to my YouTube channel privately. So, if you pick your nose or something, nobody's going to say it. And then I rip the MP4 off of that and edit that, and that's our podcast.
Okay. And Peabody, you're muted again. We just lost your voice.
And I just show up.
You just show up.
Peabody is awesome at the questions, and she's really great that we have these random 5 questions that we close every interview with, and they're literally like random, and she's awesome with them. I love those. They're my favorite part.
We might want to ask Shannon those questions, so I'd like to see his.
We can do that.
What questions? What questions?
They're random.
Is Shannon? Are you a food blogger?
No, I am not a food blog. I love food. Does that count?
Well, sure, but so what is your podcast? Then what is your podcast about? I guess.
So I'm
I don't know.
a podcast producer. So what I've done in
okay.
the past 15 years is I've been in radio. Now, in radio, I have learned all the audio editing. I've learned all the segues. I've learned all the techniques that have gone into basically creating a radio show. And podcasting is something that is pretty much the same thing. It is just, in other words, on-demand radio, what everyone likes to call it. It's just on-demand radio. The thing that we noticed, or the thing that I noticed within podcasts, and it's not me bagging on podcasters or other podcasters, because, I'm not running currently a podcast on my own, but I manage podcasts, is that most podcasts are boring. And the thing is that when you jump into a space like podcasting, you need to learn how to be an entertainer. That's just really what this is all about. So I think months ago, I had said that podcasting, I think I said it on one of your shows, Chef, is that we have to include this element of edutainment. You have to educate while you're entertaining people on a consistent basis. So when we add the element of a podcast into our blog or anything like that, we have to remember that we need to entertain these people because they want an experience. They want to remember something that you had learned or a new tip. Something that Keith had said earlier. She was talking about how she created her own podcast and why she's using it in YouTube to record these podcasts. Well, there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of podcasters out there that don't know how to use YouTube to create a podcast. They are so stuck in the mindset of using a Skype recorder, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that at all. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just it makes it so much easier when you're using something like YouTube. Now, imagine if this entire Hangout that we're doing for this virtual bloggers conference was a podcast. And I mean, hey, you rip it down, you put it into an audio format, and hey, there it is. It's content that's repurposed. Not only that, but you also have the YouTube video that is available right there that you can actually drive traffic to. And once you've gone in and optimized those YouTube videos, you can actually drive traffic either back to your website, back to your YouTube channel, back to your podcast. Those are just a few things that you can do with recording your podcast inside of YouTube. So was there a question that you actually asked me? Because I know I kind of got off.
I didn't know your background as far as what your podcast was, or if it was about food blogging, or what, basically. So I was just, you answered it, so that was
in a long format. You got to watch me, man. You got to watch me.
Although I would like to say that we personally do not keep our YouTube recorded up because half of our guests come on because we promise they can do it in sweats and no makeup. So with the promise, it goes away.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to get ready to actually get in front of a camera. Like, I actually took a shower for this today, Chef. So
I'm amazed at how comfortable you get, though. After a few times, you're like, yeah, I've got a beanie on and a sweater. Life goes on. Let's do this. Like, at first, you're like, oh, I've got to look good. And then, by the third time, you're like, yep, we're just talking.
Yeah, it's interesting. You guys probably have experienced this. I don't know how many episodes you guys are in, but I remember when I first had my own podcast, and I had I remember it was like about 25 episodes. And by the 25th episode, we were like, yeah, whatever. Like, you just get so comfortable with it. But there's also there's ups and downs to being comfortable in front of or on a podcast. Is that you can sometimes get too comfortable, and you might be watering down your content sometimes because you're just that comfortable with what you're doing. So something that we've learned in radio over the course of the years is that you always have to be pushing the envelope because there's always something that you're working on at any moment. It's just like an exercise routine. If you have mastered the cardio game, and you probably know this, Keita, from running this morning, but if you've mastered the cardio game, then what do you got to do next? Well, you don't want to lose muscle. You've probably got to go start working out muscle. So there's something always to learn within podcasting.
Great. We do have a question. My comment tracker is not working. It stopped for some reason. But Nazim Beltran is asking, because I know there are diverse media approaches, but can we combine podcasting and live stream stuff like Periscope or Meerkat?
Well, I don't know if these guys want to talk about that, but I know right now what I'm doing is I'm actually periscoping this right now. I personally periscope at the radio station. There's certain things that I do behind the scenes. It's something that's cool to see, the behind the scenes, maybe the pre-production, things like that. But in terms of streaming it, and I've thought about that already, and I've already tried to test some of this stuff on Periscope. It just doesn't work. It's not going to work in the format that you want it to work in terms of great audio, because that's the format that you're using is great audio. You're trying to create great audio. So Periscope is not exactly the best thing to do. It's just I think it's good supplemental material, but you can get a lot of people who come in and look at your Periscope, and you can direct them, like, say, to this Hangout. Right now I'm Periscoping, and I've got some people. I've got one guy, or someone named ASU alum, and she's on Periscope right now, and I'm hoping that she comes to this Hangout and she's watching.
All right. So as for doing, Shannon, we talked earlier. You have a course, and that you're doing a mini course on podcasting. You are a producer. You teach people how to podcast too. Mm-hmm. And what type of equipment would you say is best suited for podcasting? And ladies, feel free to jump in on this too, and ask each other questions.
Yeah, there's numbers of equipment, but I personally use the Blue Yeti USB microphone. If we're gonna do it like this in this format, and it really just all depends. If you're gonna do it in this format, the Blue Yeti all you need is a Blue Yeti microphone. You need some headphones, and you need at least Adobe Audition. That's the most you're gonna need. Okay. You're talking about anywhere upwards near $100 to $200. It could be up to $200 depending, just for you to collect your equipment. I personally use Adobe Audition because there are tricks and tips that you can use in Adobe Audition that you can't use in other audio editing programs. It makes the job a lot easier. It'll save you hours of time. That's for basic.
Keita sent me a box and said, open it, take the stuff out, plug it in. Which just happens to be the Blue Yeti, but which was very easy to set up, because if anyone can do it, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because Peabody does not have the technical side, so that shows you just how easy it is. I mean, the Blue Yeti is really, really plug and play. At the moment, I'm using headphones because my equipment's actually at my shop, but I've used the Snowball. I think it's the Blue Snowball. That's what they started with, and then we did go to a full-on mixer and mics at the shop, which I do not bust out for this sort of thing. It's just a lot of plugs and way too much work. I found that the Blue Yeti does fantastic quality for exactly this sort of thing. I don't think that you really need to, if you're not there yet, invest the kind of money on a full-on mixer board and, very high-end mic. I'm not going to tell you not to, but I think for a starting podcast, there's no need for that investment. And to be fair, we don't use Adobe Audition. We actually use Audacity, so I'm going to have to test out Adobe Audition.
Right, and I haven't played with Audacity as of late, and I don't know what the capabilities are to ripping the audio from MP3 to Audacity and how long it takes. But all I know is that when I last used it, and that was probably a couple years ago, it took forever.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the case anymore. It could be different.
No, it still does. I'm eager to try out Audition.
Yeah, well then, we'll reach out after this. We'll connect after this, and I'll show you. It'll take you like 2 minutes, and you'll be like, "Oh, thank God!"
Right.
So Audition is not hard to use. Then you just download and.
I'm sorry, Chef. What was that?
I said Audition is not hard to use, because I'm going to try and use that too, I guess, if I'm going to start podcasting these sessions. So.
Yeah, it's easy if you know what you're doing. That's why I create the mini course, because you can go nuts. Once you pop it up, it's like so many controls, and you're like, oh my God, it's like walking into the Battlestar Galactica, Enterprise, whatever, Millennium Falcon. You're never gonna know what to use. before you actually get in and start using Adobe Audition. I've been using Adobe Audition since it was Cool Edit Pro, and I'm just used to. I know the controls. I know what to use, and that's like, this is not me pushing my product by any means, because it's not even up for sale right now. But it's just, that's what I teach in my course. I just teach how to use those pieces inside of Audition, what you necessarily need to make your podcast sound even better, because you can use something like Audacity and it works perfectly. Audacity works wonderfully for the beginning podcaster, but when you start jumping in and you're getting up to like episode 30, 40, 50, you're probably thinking, I need to start investing some time into maybe making this podcast sound a little bit better. And with the integration with applications into brand new cars, like Stitcher and iPod and the podcasts into the car dashboards, you're going to be competing against something like radio, where radio still has a very high listenership. I don't care what anyone will tell you. They say radio's dying. Radio is not dying by any means, but radio is definitely on a slow decline right now because of these applications and because of these different forms of media like podcasting. That's why we're stepping up the game in terms of podcasting.
You touched on something right there, Shannon, that you might want to make the audience aware of. You said the availability in cars. I know what you're talking about, but does the general audience know that like most of the upcoming cars are going to be, you can just like plug and play your podcasts?
What's interesting is that no one knows about this yet until these brand new cars get out into the public. I mean, I believe Hyundai maybe that just released the very first car that had those applications in their cars. So now podcasting applications are becoming more ubiquitous inside of your vehicle, because let's face it, the majority of people out there live in their car on a commute. And if you don't have something that's great to listen to, then what's the point of even having a radio at that point? So you want to have great content for the time whenever you can either buy a brand new car and have these applications installed on your dashboard, or you can actually buy the unit and put them into your car, and then you can listen to podcasts that way. And it's just not for podcasting; it's for music. It's going to be for Google Play Music. It'll be for iTunes. It will be for just a number of things.
So, Chef, can I ask you why you keep saying you're resisting it? What is it that you're resisting, or what is it that hasn't gotten you into wanting to podcast?
Just one more thing to do.
Okay, totally understandable. Totally.
That's a great question for our listeners, though. Is there a resistance that they're experiencing that we can help discuss while we're on here talking about podcasting? Maybe reasons why people are intimidated or haven't started podcasts of their own yet.
I have a question here from Julie. It goes, how does Sony SoundForge Pro compare to Adobe Audition?
If you were to compare it in terms of cars, Adobe Audition is the Cadillac of programs, and SoundForge would be like the Pinto.
You mean it's going to explode if we hit it?
Yeah. I mean, SoundForge just does not cut it. It's not going to cut it for what you're trying to do. And I'm not trying to say that to discourage you, really. It's just you're going to bang your head against the wall and you're like, I have no idea why this isn't going to work. He's told me to do these things, but I'm telling you to do them in a particular manner because it makes the job easier.
Sure, banging your head against the wall is all fun, but you have to stop every now and then and get some work done.
Right.
Kita's going, no.
She's like, I don't like banging my head against the wall.
It feels so good when you stop.
So, Shannon, what do you don't run a podcast now, but what do you find is like the hardest thing? For me, I find the hardest is that, we have a series of questions, but then it changes based on whoever we're, interviewing. We always have a fast five at the end that have absolutely nothing to do with anything. Usually it's like, what recipe is the most aerodynamic in a food fight on your blog kind of thing, not anything super relevant. But for us, we're always hoping that a conversation will take off from the question that we had, asked the person, and a lot of times we'll get the person just give like one-word answer, and then we're like flying through the interview because we're they're giving very short answers and they're not elaborated, and we're just like, okay, we're reaching, we're trying, we're doing something. What do you find is the hardest?
I think for a beginner podcaster and someone who's looking to interview, the hardest thing is to, yeah, you're talking about it, keeping that conversation going. So instead of asking a flat-ended question of like, what is the biggest thing that you see that is difficult inside of the kitchen or something like that, and they'll say, oh, a hot frying pan. And they just kind of leave it dead-ended. So the goal of the broadcaster at that point is to drag the answer out of them. Now, I give them 2 chances to drag an answer out of them. If they're not answering the question, I just cut the interview off because there's no point. If you're not going to give me great content, I'll just say, you know what? Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, I'll let you know whenever this is going to come up in my podcast feed. That's what I typically say. But in the case of getting them to answer, you have to start engaging them just as much as you would engage someone online in anything. Just as we engage people in the comments that we're seeing right here, you want to ask them the questions. You say, you say the frying pan. What do you mean by that? Can you go into a little more detail and describe to me what you're talking about? And if they're still giving you short answers, that's when you start cutting it off. But everyone has something to say, and everyone has a story. And you want to be able to provide that experience for the listener so that they can have a colored picture in their mind of this guy sitting in the kitchen or sitting where he is cooking or whatever he's doing, and paint the picture. It's all about theater of the mind because we're listening. We're in a listening format. So you got to create this theater of the mind for people to really colorize the idea or the story, make them be a part of that experience. So I think that's the hardest thing for people when they first start to podcast. They don't know how to A, engage the guest, but B, they don't know how to also have just a natural conversation that segues into the next topic. I guess that's why you learn the gift of gab over time. You learn to not have spaces in between your conversation, because I'm sure everyone has ever heard a podcast where they'll be talking and they'll be laughing, and then all of a sudden there's that awkward pregnant pause. It's like, so then they just kind of go into the next thing, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's painful to hear. So if it's painful for you, for the listener to hear, it's probably just as painful for you, and vice versa. So it's just the habit of going over and over and over and practicing the stuff over and over. Practice takes place off the microphone, and it takes place while you're on the microphone too. So it's just constant practice.
Another note on that too, I think from a beginner standpoint, is initially I thought that we needed to get great content out of every one of our guests. Like, we needed them. And a friend of mine messaged me and he was like, how's it going? And I said, just same thing. I said, we had this person that no matter what we asked, their answers were like, boop.
Yeah. And we would try and drag it out and say, what kind of frying pan do you like? I mean, we were like, and it's just, and then, nope.
And so he reminded me that if that happens, though, end it. Like you just said, like, don't be afraid to end that, because you're not going to turn it around. You're not going to make that person, they're probably nervous too. Maybe this is their first time recording online, or they're having, the kids in the background screaming and they're just stressed or whatever. So remember that not everybody's going to give you amazing content, and that's okay. You need to kind of just not.
You just got to remember, I think, that people are people. There was someone asked me or it was Miss Eileen on Periscope right now. She said, if they don't like to talk, don't invite them on your podcast. Sometimes we don't know that they don't like to talk. And I've experienced that numbers of times with guests where they have been a great guest on someone else's radio show, and then they come to your radio show and they don't even talk, and you're like, okay, seriously? Like, what gives?
Well, and that's a very hard part for us, because we're coming from a world that's mostly written. So you're knowing the person's written personality, which a lot of times you have a lot more introverts and stuff like that. And to come on the podcast, you really do have to be more of an extrovert for the most part. And so you get them, and they want to come on. But yeah, sometimes what they're writing and who they are as a person don't necessarily mesh. So a lot of times we're meeting this person for the first time because we've specifically chosen them because they excel in a certain topic, and we want to highlight that in food blogging, and you get them on and you're like, oh, okay, so no.
Right. It's a hit and miss game, really. It is. If you're coming from the blogging world, I mean, I have people that I've interviewed from blogs. But I think they've also learned about me through Hangouts. They've seen my personality. They've seen the engagement that I create with them. And I make it a point to just be personable with them. That's really all it is. And I mean, Keita came in. She's like, for those people who didn't see it before she came in, she's like, I'm so sorry that I look this way because I just ran a half marathon. And she was creating just a conversation. And I was like, hey, Keita, nice to meet you and all this stuff. You're just being friendly. I mean, the hardest part about starting a podcast is being friendly. That's the hardest part. And I mean, don't worry about the technical aspect, because the moment you crack the mic, most people are like freezing up and they go, oh my God, the mic is live, and they freak out. So it's just being conversational. It's just being natural. It's just being a person and getting the audience to love who you are. Because I was just explaining this today on an Instagram post that I created. You got to be the experience for them when you're on the microphone, and especially whenever you see them off of the microphone. You want to be the experience. So whatever you are on the microphone, be that times 10 for them, so that they can really, really love who you are. You build a great fan that way.
We have a question here from another question from Nazim, and he goes, what other means to distribute your podcast apart from iTunes and your website are there?
I'll let the girls take that if they want to.
So we share via a newsletter. And before we even launched our podcast, we hyped the podcast on our both of our individual blogs, and we created a web space for just this podcast. And we encouraged and strongly encouraged everyone to sign up for our newsletter. I am a firm believer in email marketing. And so every time there is a new podcast, there is an email that goes along with it. So if you're not, for some reason, subscribed on iTunes, I'm sorry, Peabody?
Oh, I was going to say, plus we also, usually whoever we, of course, have interviewed, they also share, like, and depending on who we had, like our first couple food bloggers were heavy hitters. So they had millions and millions of listeners, readers, and they tuned in because they want to learn more about their favorite blogger.
Exactly. We kind of stacked the deck a little bit. We knew that if this was going to work, we had to come out of the gate with somebody really, really interesting, somebody that everybody wanted to spend a day in the kitchen with. So not that everybody doesn't have great content to bring, but if you say, the Babe Ruth of food blogs is coming, more people are going to turn in. And so we did. We lined up our first few podcasts with some really big hitters. And then we started to mix in the content and the people that we knew would be valuable. Not that those big hitters weren't. They were great. But we know that there's value in a lot of people because there's so many skills involved with food blogging, from photography to editing to writing to publishing, marketing cookbooks, making it onto TV. It's such a diverse market, and there's so much to learn when you think, hey, I'm going to bake a cupcake, snap a photo of it, and start a blog. And so I do send a graphic out to every one of our guests ahead of time, like with their picture that they sent me and our title, for them to share it on their social networks. So I'm encouraging our guests to share it, and I tell them, like, hey, your podcast goes live tomorrow. Here's all your information, the link to your podcast. Please, if you don't mind, share it. And we do share all over social media. Pinterest, I have a food blogging board with tips and things like that I share on Pinterest, and obviously Facebook social media.
We've had a couple questions here about video podcasts compared to audio podcasts. Has anyone delved into the video podcasting?
No, I personally don't dive into the video. I mean, I don't dive into video just because it's not what I do professionally. So, but the thing with video podcasting is that it's almost a production. Perfect person to really refer to about that is Jeff C. with the Manly Pinterest Tips podcast. He's been on your conference this weekend. And that's how he actually started out in the very beginning. I was helping him out with that. But he did a lot of the legwork when it came to putting his podcast up into iTunes for video blogging or video podcasting. And he was able to show up inside of iTunes New and Noteworthy. That is like the front page of Google for iTunes. And he was able to show up in there, and he started gaining some traction. But what was great about him having a video podcast was that when he launched his audio podcast, that people went to the iTunes store, looked at his audio podcast, and cross-promoted just below his audio podcast was his video podcast. So he was getting kind of just both, but video is so labor intensive and it's a lot of space. You better have a lot of money when it comes down to hosting your video, because it's a lot of space, like YouTube video. I mean, it's just a lot.
I think it's Jay Baer, and I didn't Google this really quickly, so apologize for that, who recently, within the last year, started doing, he does his podcast still, but he's now doing like 30-second videos or something like that weekly too. And so there's a way to mesh both without, overworking yourself, and I think it's a great place to be, but this hair ain't that pretty, so I'm not doing YouTube anytime soon.
Yeah, I think, I've seen Jay's podcast, video podcast, but that's the thing, is that video podcasts like Gary Vaynerchuk, he does his video podcast, but it's just video is all it is. You got to remember that it's either anywhere between 2 minutes to 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, they're very short. They're very, very short. Someone like Gary could probably afford it because he's got the capital behind that. But I would just start with an audio podcast. But you can do video if you want to. It's totally up to you. I have someone in my course that wanted to do a video podcast on desert landscaping around Arizona.
Who? I might need to know that.
I am still looking. I'm still waiting for her to launch it.
Shannon, I'm curious, since you produce podcasts, what do you think is the sweet spot time for how long you are getting the person involved in your podcast, but not going past where you're like, okay, like I've got to get in the meeting, like this is running long.
So you're asking me, when do I shut them up?
Yeah, sure.
This is another thing that you pull in from radio, and there may be podcasters that disagree with me, but this is just proven. It's just proven over time in case studies, is that the shorter the better. The shorter the better. But if I were to create a podcast, I like to personally create a podcast that is a commute long. So it could be 25 minutes, it could be 20 minutes, it could be about 30 minutes.
God, if we're in Seattle, that's a 2 hour. You need a 2 hour podcast. Yeah.
So I would create a 30-minute podcast. I mean, that's about the sweet spot where you're doing it. My personal podcast was we called it the 20-minute podcast, and the tagline was the weirdest 40 minutes on the internet, but the podcast was never 40 minutes, it was always an hour long. So there was a lot of play on words within the title itself, but the content was what mattered for us. We had guests, we had segments, we had comedy bits. And so if the content was engaging enough for them to come back in the afternoon, they listened. And they let us know. Why did we quit that? I don't know. I think it was because I got involved in whatever other passion project that I had going on. But it's the content. The content time would be about 30 minutes, I would say, if you're just trying to get started out.
That's what we shoot for. Although we had a particularly long one, but we kept it long because it just rolled and it was awesome and funny. And we probably lost our sponsorship from Dare and Moms Against Drunk Driving, but
and I did edit out we
did edit some things out, but
minutes of that.
But it was just awesome. So it was like you can't edit it down to 30 minutes because we shoot for 30 is what we like to do. But we just had one that we just rolled with it, and we just laughed the whole time. And I was like, if I'm laughing, probably the crazy people that read my blog will probably laugh at this too.
And I'm with you. I like the commute idea. I like the cardio idea. I try to time it for a cardio workout because that's when I listen to my podcast. And so I'm like, all right, that's what I try to shoot for, is the cardio workout.
Right. And I mean, you can definitely survey your audience as you're building your audience through email, because I know Yukita mentioned about email marketing. I'm a big fan of email marketing too. I think that is the step that you need to have in any type of marketing plan. I mean, there are probably people that disagree with me, but I think that is the step you need to have in order to drive traffic to the audience or to the podcast. But you can always survey them and say, what's a reasonable time for you?
I'm just going to put this out there. If they say that email marketing is not the way to go, they're wrong. That's official. It's on Google now.
Yeah, it's on Google. It's officially embedded forever. So remember that whenever it comes back to bite you in the butt.
If that's the worst thing that bites me today.
Right. Right.
we had a question on that note. We had a question from Jason Weiser. What is the return on investment of podcasts for the three of you? Increased sales, bottom line?
So this is a loaded question. Peabody and I went into this not intending to monetize it at all. We don't want to. We both monetize our blogs. We both have been blogging for quite some time. And even though there is an opportunity, and I believe that there is a great opportunity to monetize podcasts through, I just think through all of your content and sponsorships and how you can cross-promote it. I firmly believe that, but I'm going to have to default to Shannon on that because Peabody and I actually have a firm we're not going to monetize Season with Sass.
We're just trying to help other bloggers.
Right. I think, for the longest time, in the beginning when I first got started, that there was this conception that you could really, really, really monetize on a podcast. And the return on investment was like, oh, I spend this amount of time, and it's all about these metrics that we're using, and I can get this sponsorship and all that. You could definitely do that. But I think as we return back to the email marketing game, what are you doing to try to get people back to your email marketing? And then from there, what are you doing inside of your email marketing that is going to promote you being at a conference, you promote a program, you promoting whatever. Now, if you feel it's too much time for you to take to go in there and do a podcast, then maybe podcasting isn't really for what you're looking to do, because podcasting is for people who want to continue to get their thoughts and ideas out. It's like video blogging. If you've ever watched Jeff Walker does a video blog every week, and it's like a 2 to 3 minute video blog every week. And yet, he's not giving anything out different every week, but every year he has the PLF formula that comes out, and he's got his affiliates that help him out that way. So it's just really going to depend on where you want to take your game, because I wouldn't say podcasting is going to be your moneymaker until you start building that email list. And
I also think that initial ROI, there's a huge learning curve. I think the first time we recorded a podcast for my comic book store, it took like 4 hours to edit the original podcast, and like the first few weeks that's what it was taking the guys, and it eventually it got to 30 minutes, boom, it's out. But those first few weeks were hard because they did want it to be something, and they did want an immediate it to be Kim Kardashian and break the internet. And it's like, guys, the internet's pretty big these days, and we're not Kim.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, again, there's a big misconception of how big you can be on the internet, but I'll be speaking at Podcast Movement coming up in the end of July, and the people that I'm speaking to are a lot of the same people that I'm already interacting with online anyway. So branching out into other fields and talking about maybe your particular niche to other audiences that might be interested. So in the instance of food bloggers, maybe you want to go talk to fitness instructors, because nutrition is just as good as it's about nutrition and fitness. I mean, you just got to get creative. I want to jump back though real quick to the thought of to Jason's question about the ROI. If you're using something like within your hosting to host your audio, if you're using something like Libsyn or Blueberry, or even Blueberry, I'm even sure about SoundCloud too, but I'm going to use Blueberry for the example. If you're using one of those platforms to host your audio, you can get metrics right there. And as you start growing the metrics over time, you can build sales sheets sales one sheets to go off and pitch to companies and say, look, these are the amount of downloads I have per week. This is where my target audience is. Like, it could be you may have a big audience that is out of Nashville, Tennessee, and maybe you start targeting markets in Nashville, Tennessee, or targeting businesses in Tennessee, showing them these numbers and letting them know, hey, I'd like to do some business with you. Maybe there's a sponsorship that's available right there. Never know what to expect, but it's about the creativity that you get with the metrics that you're building over time. Whoa, awkward pregnant pause.
Well, aren't you getting, besides just that, the opportunities to advertise and the opportunity to monetize that way, isn't more coming back your way through this if you're blogging, if you're using other media? Aren't people being directed to other things that you're doing?
I would say yes, but I think for me the unexpected thing was that that Keita and I started this to make other bloggers better, but it has made me a better blogger. So I think in a non-monetary sense, like that's what I've gotten out of it. I've been blown away by some of the bloggers that we have had, and that I'm sitting here saying, well, okay, that's why you're a billion times more successful than me, because you do X, Y, and Z, and I didn't even know that was an option, kind of thing. And so if I didn't know, and my blog just turned 10 on Thursday, so I've been around the block for a while now. So if I didn't know, that means all these new people had no idea either. So, it's not always about what you get from
Sometimes it's about
monetary.
the feels.
Yeah, sometimes it's about the
Oh my God, it's about the feels.
All the feels.
No, I agree with you completely. We got to also watch out what we're seeing online. I mean, there are a lot of people that are promoting products and business and services, whatever it may be, the easiest way, the fastest way, this and that. Boiling it down to the very bare bones is that, you know what? It's going to take work. It's going to take work. I can show you shortcuts, but it's always going to take work no matter what. And regardless of how you're going about promoting your podcast, regardless, you're going to need to figure out and make those networking connections. That is another huge thing. Keita, I think you mentioned something about that, where when you're when you got your podcast up and running, you had some big hitters. Big hitters are huge. And if you're not ready, if your website's not ready to optimize to collect the email address, even if you're emailing them once a month, give them the option to get onto your email list. Because, I mean, Keita said it herself. That's how she disseminates her podcast out to her audience.
Keita, I didn't know if that was your boyfriend or the dog.
No, I'm sorry. We have a guest star. He is being...
Where is he?
I thought Keita was just excited to get on camera again. She was like over here waving.
No,
I thought she was kind of like giving you like a little, woo, go Shannon with your...
Go there. When she was laughing and giggling, my mind was going completely.
No, my puppy has decided that he's going to sit on the ottoman and try to lick the computer.
There you go.
I will say that I think it takes more time than what we naively originally thought. I know for me, I'm the one who tends, since I'm not the technical person, and there's two of us, I tend to be the one that, away she went. I tend to be the one that writes out all the questions, researches the person, and like Shannon said, I will go and search and see if they've been on another podcast, something, so I get some sort of sense of their personality and where it's going to possibly go. Unfortunately, food bloggers don't really actually do a lot of audio or video, and so that's where we get into that we don't know what their personality is going to be like because we haven't actually heard or met them in person. So our first one, and this is, be prepared for technical difficulties, because our very first podcast, which we were insanely embarrassed over because we had asked, it was Jessica of How Sweet It Is, and she had just had a baby. She got somebody to come watch the baby. We had done test runs, you name it, and we go to record, and 4 seconds after, or 4 to 10 seconds after every word we said, you'd hear it again through the audio thing, and we could not figure out how to stop it. We did all this stuff, and so we had, after about 20 minutes of wasting her time, we said, can we just please reschedule? And you just have to be kind of prepared for that, and you also have to warn them, like, if you suddenly disappear off of Google Hangouts, like that, you can pop back on, right, Keita?
I pop back on. Yeah, we've had Wi-Fi issues. We had somebody recording from a phone in their car, and so it wasn't exactly the best environment, but they were, doing what they could. And so you have to be flexible to the guest. It's kind of disheartening sometimes because you want the best audio. You want, somebody who can focus and answer you without being distracted and having a dog try to lick their computer screen. But sometimes the dog will not stop standing on the ottoman for whatever reason, and you kind of just have to be willing to roll with that, and that part can be frustrating sometimes.
Definitely. Amen. Awkward pregnant pause, filling the space right here.
Well, that's what makes life interesting, and that's what makes these things. I mean, I've done enough of these video sessions to have seen quite a bit of different things going on. So, it's expect the unexpected, and if you don't expect that, you're going in naive because shit's going to happen.
Oh, Chef dropping the bomb.
Well, we were dropping the F-bomb earlier. We were talking about Facebook.
Oh. Evil Facebook.
Actually, Denver Prophet, and you guys did talk about it, but he may have missed it because the best tool to use when recording a remote guest, and he's saying, again, Skype, HOAs, or is there another method that you like to use?
So I personally just, we talked about this in the beginning. Keita talked about this. I personally use Hangouts. There may be some limitations, like Keita had said, where there's Wi-Fi, bad Wi-Fi. If you're using a MacBook Pro, it's probably not the best idea, which I'm like not following my own advice because I'm actually on a MacBook Pro right now. But you should probably be plugged in somewhere into a hard line. But if you're going to be doing something more remote, and again, Keita touched on this, you can buy the mixing boards, and there's a lot of plugs, and you can draw schematics to plug all this stuff in. But if you want to go about it a little easier, you can invest in the Zoom H5 recorder, digital recorder. That would probably run you anywhere between $100, maybe $200. I can't remember what the last time I looked at it, but I just had a client come down to my house a couple weeks ago, and we set up his H5 recorder. The only thing is that you'll need is a Shure SM58 microphone, a couple of those, some XLR cables, and an SD card. But I would recommend that you get an SD card that is anywhere, I think it's like the highest 320 gigs. I would get 320 gigs because the H5 Zoom recorder records in waves, and wave files are massive. They're huge, huge, huge files, uncompressed files. They are not an MP3 compressed file. So that's just one way of doing it. Be mindful of your recording time when you're recording with the H5 Zoom recorder, because you could potentially run out of space. So, but the only thing with that is that it's just a digital recorder. You can actually attach it to a DSLR camera, and you can record the sound that you're recording with a video on a DSLR camera. But it's very good for remote recording too. You're just not going to have a live element. If you have live elements like I used to, where there's hotkeys and drops, you wouldn't have that element in there.
So it's a lot easier to use HOAs.
Yeah, I mean, I recommend that, but again, like my client that came down the other day, he travels constantly, and so he's like, I have no time to be on an HOA, even though I think it would be easier, but he just wants to do it with the H5 recorder. He wants to have the ambient noise in the background. Some people say having ambient noise sucks, and I say, what's your preference, and what is going to annoy your audience the most? They'll tell you. They'll definitely tell you.
Very good.
Our most annoying sound, we just made it a character as part of our podcast, and that's my recently rescued spaniel, who often sits next to me and snores. Just a very soft one, but a nice little background, and we said, okay, here's our newest podcast recorder and member, and we rolled with it.
I think most people kind of get the understanding that most podcasts are really recorded from home. I mean, they're recorded from home.
Well, plus in the food blogging, most of our guests either have pets or children, and we'll be recording, and suddenly you'll see some child go, running across in the background, and I laugh because usually if we have one of the more stay-at-home, like, mommy food bloggers, and they'll say, okay, I have 45 minutes, I've prepared this much stuff, and I threw candy at them, so they'll peak at their sugar high in about, 25 minutes, go.
And we have seen them peak.
Yes, we've seen them peak.
We have seen the rise and fall in the background. But I have to say, funny story, side note, one night, just due to scheduling conflict, I had to record from inside my store while my store was open. Wow. That was fun. Now, as the comic book store, when we did a podcast, we actually did it live while we were open in the store. We have diner booths in my comic book store. They're really rad. And so we would record the podcast live while the store was open and invite comments from people shopping, and it created so much fun. Like, people would just walk up, sit down, and chime in, or you'd hear so-and-so shouting in the background disagreeing with us, or the people come and going really created for that particular podcast a great vibe. Because it was a comic book shop podcast recorded in a comic book store, the authenticity of it actually happening while we were open was perfect for the podcast, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, I muted myself. I think that I love the idea of doing those types of things in the remote broadcast, like what you're talking about with people coming up and saying hi. Those are just little elements of proving that it's not canned. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have this thing in radio where a lot of people around the country know that most radio stations are on automate. And it's just rotating music, or it's rotating just pre-recorded material. Now, yeah, you are pre-recorded material on a podcast, but that element of like maybe someone walking up or you interviewing someone, it's very, very, it's so old school radio to me that adds to an element of like the live feel. This is why I love using the element of Periscope with a podcast. Like, someone can actually see you doing your own podcast, and you can actually get these real-time questions. That's another huge thing, is just real-time. How do you incorporate the real-time engagement? And that's why I think Periscope, Anna Hoffman talked about this yesterday, but it's just the real-time engagement that you're getting from someone. You can actually answer the questions in real time with something like Periscope and incorporating it into your podcast just as much as you talking with someone with a microphone in a restaurant.
We just have a question here from Jason Weiser. He wants to know, Keita, if you have read Gru the Wanderer.
I have. Not all of the issues, not the recent ones, but I have read Gru in the past.
Well, then he says you have won his internal respect.
Not the manager of a comic book store for no reason.
Well, that's good. Well, guys, you've given us a lot to think about for podcasting. And Shannon, you said you have your mini course coming up. If you want to leave any links, feel free, or reach out to Shannon, and I'm sure he will share some information with you. And Keita and Peabody, you've had me on as a guest on your show, and I appreciate that. And it's not as hard, I guess, as it seems. We should just try it. Just get over it.
Shot of tequila sometimes makes it not so bad either.
Yeah, tequila makes it so much easier. Tequila makes
I've done my shots of booze, and if you can see the gray hairs. So no more booze. It's just been stress and tequila, and I'm over that now.
Well, there we go, losing sponsors again.
Losing our sponsors again. We used to, we still do the podcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I used to have a segment on my blog called Tipsy Tuesdays, and I would make the cocktail in the morning and photograph it to get it up on the blog, but then we would record right after that, and I'm not going to make a cocktail and let it go to waste. So sometimes, I'm a little more loose than usual.
If it loosens people up, especially people who are first-timers and whatnot, I'm not going to tell them, it's the same thing in photography. We don't want anybody to get lazy-eyed intoxicated, but maybe one glass of champagne before a photo shoot, it loosens you up and makes you a little, more chatty.
Keita, you almost sounded like, do you remember the Saturday Night Live skit, the Continental?
No, I don't. I'll have
you
to
don't
Google
remember that? Okay,
Nope.
So it was Christopher Walken, and he would say champagne.
More cowbell.
More cowbell.
Awesome.
Do you guys use? We had a question about updating social media. Do you update each site separately, or do you use something like every post? Do you automate it, or do you send your?
I schedule all of my shares through Buffer, and I manage all of my accounts individually.
Okay, Shannon, do you suggest people sharing their podcasts out? I mean, on all social media. I mean, try and get as many eyes to where it is, or do you let the podcast just kind of be found?
Here's the thing. Do I have 20 more minutes? Here's the thing: is that use the social media account that best suits you and the audience, and the social media account where you're going to gather the audience to come in and really kind of follow what you're doing. The goal, if you are a podcaster, and I don't think this is ever really relayed to anyone starting a podcast. The goal of being a podcaster is to be on other people's podcasts. That's the goal, because you're marketing your podcast. So you have to remember that you're doing two things. You're not only podcasting for yourself, but you're trying to get on other shows. What's the point of podcasting if you can't market it, right? So you should be on someone else's podcast or someone else's Hangout on air, or be writing for someone else. Market your podcast. That's the way to do it. And then, of course, then they can come into any social channel that they want, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram. I just happen to be on all these, like most of these. And I post different pieces of content to them. And they find out who I am regardless. They'll go to my website. They'll find out I work for 98K UPD. And some may listen from Florida, some may not. But as long as I've captured that, I've got some dude in Canada who listens to me now because of social media. And that is the coolest thing, is that I've got a listener. Maybe he's not on my email list, but he listens. He listens religiously every night from Canada.
That's Keita and I's goal, to be huge in Denmark.
Yes, where that death metal lives.
I guess I need to rework my answer, but yeah, I schedule everything through Buffer. And yes, we do cross-promote because we're food bloggers recording a food blogging podcast, so I do share on my food website, but I have multiple other websites that I manage that obviously I would not share my food blogging podcast with. The audience of Girl Carnivore does not get anything about the food blogging podcast, but if they follow me on Twitter, they're going to see that. Like you said, they're going to find you. They're going to know, you share a little bit of everything on your Google Plus page. And I really don't know why I wouldn't want somebody to know that I do a food podcast and stuffed sausage.
Yeah. I mean, just kind of be everywhere as much as you can, but you don't have to like over inundate and stress yourself out and just want to put a gun to your head and pull the trigger. I mean, that's not the goal here. The goal is to have fun with it. And from the sounds of like what Peabody and Keita are doing, they're doing it because they love having fun. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, you're doing it because you're having fun. And they're doing it because they want to have fun and tequila. 2 reasons.
And we want to help bloggers.
Right. Oh, say 3. So it's about just having the fun. If you put, I don't know, man. If you're putting this element of like, how can I maximize on the money and make money about this stuff? You know what? You're thinking about it all wrong. Do it because you want to do it, because you already have a business that's already ready in place. And you want to maybe add another element. And if that is the case, then you can definitely add those elements of sales marketing funnels in there if you want to. It's going to be a lot of work though, but I'm not trying to discourage you from doing that. If you want to just start podcasting, it's actually a very simple process. But if you want to start monetizing it and going down the line, then it's going to start taking work. But hey, it's not called work unless you're having fun. So it's never work unless you're having fun.
There you go. Good words to live by. And on that note, I would like to tell you, too, that Keita does have a barbecuing blog that's called Girl Carnivore, and I love it for 2 reasons. Number 1, because it's barbecue, and number 2 is because her tagline is, because even girls like to play with their meat.
Take everything with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
I was waiting for you to come up with something like that today, Chef.
Well, that's it.
I censored myself like 14 times during this.
Yeah, we've been
just so we're clear.
You've been very good. I appreciate that, but don't ever have to do that on my account. And
we're not good on our podcast, though. We'd like to say we don't edit very good in that, as far as.
People come to expect it with my show, so I don't worry about it too much.
That's why we love you, Chef.
That's it. But guys, thank you so much, and thank everyone that checked in to watch. And I will hopefully be seeing a podcast from me sometime in the near future. If not, you can call me on it. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
2 more sessions coming up. We got a WordPress session at 6 o'clock in an hour, and then at 8 o'clock we're coming back with a Circloscope and Nodex. So I'm going to go get some dinner, and I will see you all in about an hour. So have a good one, and I'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.